I did turn to drugs. And that mixed with alcohol that I had already started taking really began to take a toll on my life. And I was no longer myself. You've got jokes. Like, I was like, there are some times where you are just not subtle, God. Mm-hmm. They were our parishioners. There's no question. Our parishioners were the homeless who slept, in front of our church, in front of our steps every night.
So, Tito, you've seen the movie The Matrix, right?
Many times.
Classic, awesome, exciting movie. One of my favorite parts about that movie is the fact that you can download things into your brain, just like instantly learn something.
Yeah.
If that were the case, and you could plug something into your brain and in 1 minute be an expert,
okay,
what would you do?
I would probably want to know how to code, like using computers.
Okay.
It's just a fascinating, fascinating talent, right? And I know so many people, and I know it's not hard to learn. I don't even know where to begin, and I also don't really have the time. So if I could just do it that way, that'd be phenomenal.
I think the idea is you need 10,000 hours to be an expert, and ain't nobody got time for that. I think practically, I'd love to speak different languages.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would really help in the real world. But I think if I just had any skill, I'd love to play the piano.
Oh, okay.
Like I'd love to just be an incredible concert pianist that would have no practical purpose other than I could, make beautiful music. But I'm not practicing. That's not going to happen.
That's cool, though. I mean, those are like talents that you could use for someone else. My talent was very much like, I just want to know how computers work.
Yeah, that's weird. Why do you want to code? You thinking about making a website?
I don't know. I think I get obsessed with things that I don't know a lot about. And I know how computers work. Coding is just such a distinct field that unless you learn about it specifically, there's always going to be
there's so many different languages too.
Yeah, there's always going to be a really hard limit on what you can know about it. And that's the thing where I'm just like, I guess I have like FOMO on information. Like, no, this is information that I must have only because I don't have it now. No good reason.
Of all the things. Yeah. Yes. Well, maybe in a different life. Maybe that's what you'll do.
No, but I will say the person that we have today has a lot of very unique talents. Some musically inclined talents, but just talents that I think a lot of people wouldn't necessarily associate with the Friar off the bat, and that is Jay Woods. How's it going, Jay?
Hi guys, good to be with you.
Jay Woods, I'm curious what talents Tito's alluding to here.
What talents?
He's left us in the dark.
Super.
Tito, what are you thinking about?
I mean, he's well trained from costume design and costume making. He's got lots of skills in that regard. But there's other things that he doesn't always talk about. Like he can sing really well. He's well trained in theater, not just from like the backstage part of creating designs, but he knows a lot about theater history. So there's a lot of knowledge and skills that Jay has.
Yes. I know all about the vomitorium.
And then there's that.
which is a fancy theater term, which now is usually where scenery comes on and off. But originally it was used in the theater as where the patrons went to vomit. So, yes.
Fantastic.
Good times.
Fun
Good times.
Yeah, well, with Tito's, he is not selling you. He's not lying here. You know a lot about theater. It's not just because you're an aficionado or you've read a few books. You have worked in theater. You've worked on Broadway. Mm-hmm. Very few people can say that. Tell us about what it's like to be on Broadway.
Sure.
Everyone's dream, right?
Right? Everyone's dream. And it was a dream. I mean, it really was really wonderful. I grew up in the theater, acting and singing. From a young age, and did it throughout my childhood and into college. In college, I wasn't really sure where I was going to go, if I was going to have a career in the theater or what. So I was also interested in the priesthood at a young age. So I double majored in philosophy and theater. And so my theater career took off while I was in college, both acting and singing, but also in design and costume construction. So, so I actually, right out of college, I became the costume director for North Shore Music Theater, which at the time was a fully operational theater in Beverly, Massachusetts, regional theater. we created all of our own costumes at that time, and it was a wonderful, wonderful learning platform, and from which to move to Broadway. So was a huge show, working on a huge show, the first non-Disney production of Beauty and the Beast, where we built the entire thing from soup to nuts, from plates to silverware and walking wardrobe, talking chandeliers, the whole thing. And I was like, actually Broadway's easier than this. So I called a friend, and she said, "Great, come on down. You have your first Broadway show." So
is it that easy?
It was when you know the right people.
That's right.
And skills. So
question, was that Kim?
No, it was not. It was
okay.
Nadine Heddle.
Okay.
So Nadine was the wardrobe supervisor at North Shore Music Theater when I was an intern years before, and we're great friends. Talked to her yesterday, actually, and so she was the wardrobe supervisor at Studio 54, and a production of Pacific Overtures, which I had just done at North Shore Music Theater, was going on Broadway. And I said, "Hey, I know all about kimonos and hakama and all the amazingly
as
intricate,
one does,
right?
As one does." And so, not hakama, excuse me. Talking about wanting foreign languages. There you go, right? And so I got, that was my first Broadway show as a dresser, working backstage. And what that means is, as a dresser on Broadway, is that you not only physically dress the people in quick changes or in their dressing room and maintain all that, but you also maintain all of the clothing and wash all the clothing and sew all of that. So for the entire run. So it's a lot of work.
Yeah, you're saying you kind of build it from scratch. So you're not going to Walmart and picking out things or from the thrift store.
No.
I remember you saying one time that you had to have the right dirt stains and you had to have the right different textures of things. Like how intricate does this get?
Oh, very, very. One of the very last shows that I did for TV was a show called 0 Hour, and
great show.
It was a great show. It really was. I only worked on the first couple episodes, but I was a ager dyer on that show, which means that this one particular scene took place in India, and so I actually had to research what the dirt and everything looks like in this one particular part of India. And those were the colors that we used on the clothing. And so, it is about knowing, and how to age appropriately and all of that for clothing. So there is a lot that goes into it. And it's one of the reasons why we do use the word build costumes. It's a lot more than just sewing. Right. It's really, so, yeah.
It's amazing when you talk about this level of detail, and you hear about this with like James Cameron and the Titanic and having the same silverware and all that stuff. And then you watch anything with the Catholic Church and they're just like, I saw this once as a kid. Like, what?
Gosh.
How is there no detail of this?
I'm telling you, right? Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I was also, it's funny because actually I was an ager dyer on this show too, but I was on a TV show called The Black Donnellys. Also a really great TV show.
What's with these shows that were like one season long? They were phenomenal.
You know what it was? Black Donnellys was too dark, unfortunately, and that's the reason. It was coming in to replace The Sopranos, but it surpassed The Sopranos, which was on HBO, by the way.
Yeah.
And this was on NBC, so we shot.
So good.
I think they aired on TV 3 episodes, and they were like, "Oh, this is way too dark," and they put it on a streaming service at the time. So, yes, so that show was also another one where, we just had to know, the intricacies of that time period, the dirt, all of those things. So yeah.
Now I have to tell you this, so Jay, you know, you're always throwing out, like, if anyone has the privilege of living with you, you're always throwing out like little factoids about Broadway and stuff like that, and I love that kind of trivia. Right, that sort of information just sticks in my head. And I remember you telling us a story that I think Fiddler on the Roof was the first show to have like really historically accurate sort of recreation of like distressed and patchwork of like Russian clothing. I mean, I'm trying to be vague enough so like kind of let you fill it in. Like so, tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. The costume designer for that show, who I absolutely should know, and it's on the tip of my tongue, and it's not coming to my mind. They released. This is the original Broadway production of Fiddler. They built all of the clothing, and it was, of course, gorgeous, and it hung in the tailors and the stitchers the patterners who made the costumes. At the end of the night, they turned the lights off and they left, and all the clothing was hanging on a rack. They came in the next day, and all of the clothing had been distressed intentionally to look older and worn, as you know, people in Anatevka might have looked at that time. And the tailors came in the next day, and they thought that somebody had broken in and destroyed the costumes. So they immediately began repairing all of these clothes, but they repaired them beautifully, and all of the stitches were from Russia. So all of these in that area, and so all of the mending on these costumes immediately became even more authentic because they were mended by Russian sisters. I mean, it's incredible, really. Honestly, just fantastic. Yeah. Yep.
It's accidentally awesome.
Yeah, yes, because you can't get more authentic.
Mistakes. It reminds me. Oh my gosh, and I'm forgetting. Tito, you're gonna know who this is. It was a Malcolm Gladwell episode. But he was talking about a famous jazz artist that had a piano that was out of tune and it had keys that stuck, and he refused to play. And at the last minute decided, sure, fine, I'll play. And he had to change his whole set to do it, and it ends up becoming the greatest jazz album ever. Because he had to play simpler, he had to like make things up on the fly, and it's like I love the what is it, the necessity is the what was the line?
Yes.
Gosh, yeah.
Mother of invention.
Mother of invention. Yes.
Yeah. That's a good one. That's a really good one. But no, I always loved that story of, you know, like there's just these people from Russia who were helping to do stitching and stuff like that, and they're like, oh no, we got to repair all the clothes, and then boom, it's historically accurate.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think Broadway is full of stories like that, just full of, you know, I think one of the reasons I love being a Franciscan is because I come from a world that is so collaborative. Broadway shows do not happen by themselves, contrary to some of the stars' belief. And directors. But Broadway shows, it takes hundreds of people to put on a Broadway show, and nowadays thousands when you consider the size of the producing list. But it's so collaborative, you know, from the way that we do quick changes with the actor and how that we're completely in harmony with that. And to the actors, to the designers and shoppers and tailors and stitchers working to collaboratively create a garment. I love that part of ministry, collaborating not only with our brothers that we live with and that we work with, but also collaborating with our lay partners and religious sisters and all those that we work with. It feeds me so much, and I think a large part of that is because I come from such a collaborative world.
I love seeing that, where you find kind of the secular world, so to speak, or like a non-religious world connecting you more to your religious world. And we'll get to your kind of quote-unquote conversion in a second, but I think another thing that comes up to me with Broadway is Groundhog's Day. That it's the same thing over and over in some ways, and religious life can feel like this sometimes. And how do you find the beauty and the goodness in the mundane, ordinary thing? Because you're doing what, 7 shows a week, 8 shows a week?
8 shows a week. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is tough. And it does wear on you. I think the longest run I was ever on was The Color Purple. But even on that show, I came on as the men's ensemble dresser, left to go. I'm Kristen Chenoweth. I was Kristen Chenoweth's personal dresser for 8 years. I'd left to go dress Kristen for a show, and then I came back, and I was the character of Mister's dresser. So even then, there was some break in the monotony, but you learn different ways of passing the time and making things funny. There are a lot of jokes that happen backstage.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot of humor. We have fun with we just have fun with each other and have fun with the show. I remember on when we switched to a 5-show weekend on Color Purple, meant we had Friday night, Saturday, Sunday, and it was just a very long. Wow. It was a long weekend.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
And then so what we did is in between shows on Sunday, we started ordering empanadas from this place called Empanada Mamas, which is still there on 9th Avenue. Shout out to Empanada Mamas on 9th Avenue. And we did it for maybe more than a month, but we realized that we were just gaining way too much weight, and we had to stop it. but it was
you got to find ways to make it interesting in the middle. And I heard recently an interview with Sean Hayes, who is Jack from Will and Grace, talented Broadway musician and singer and all that. And he said that he did the same show over and over and over again, and he decided he was going to change it up for himself. And when he walked out, he put the briefcase in his left hand instead of his right hand. And he said, and then he forgot all his lines.
He gets used to doing things one way.
That is amazing. That is amazing. My last show on Broadway that I did with Kristen was Promises with Sean Hayes. I wonder if it was that show, because he did enter with a briefcase. But he is so amazing. He's so wonderful. He's so kind.
So funny.
Yeah. And so funny, and just really down to earth, and really just so caring. Yeah, great guy.
So
funny.
I have a question for you. You and I have talked about different actors and performers who we just kind of really enjoy. You really looked up to Nathan Lane, I believe, right? Mm-hmm. And you were able to meet him eventually, which you talked about that, and it was impactful for you. Who are some actors or performers, maybe some musicians that you got to meet along the way that really kind of impacted you?
Oh, good question. So one of the shows that I had the amazing privilege, it was sort of my first, I had done a lot of television before, but this show really was my first big break into a very prestigious position. I was a principal set costumer on season 3 of Ugly Betty when the show moved from LA to New York, and I dressed Vanessa Williams, Judith Light, Michael Urie, all of them, and they were such a wonderful cast. They really were. It was such a pleasure to go to work every day. Judith Light is just that. She's light. She really is. She's so grounded and down to earth and just so kind. The amount of work, the amount of humanitarian work that she's done, or care work that she's done for especially the LGBTQ community, especially during the AIDS epidemic. And she continues to be such a voice for the Trevor Project and many other organizations. She is just such a beautiful soul, and when you're with Judith, you're the only person in the world. You're the only person in the room. She's her attention on you, she's just a beautiful human being.
So you get all these great experiences. You get to meet Nathan Lane and Sean Hayes and Kristen Chenoweth, and you get to work on amazing shows like The Color Purple. Mm-hmm. You've made it, right? This is everyone's dream. Why are you a friar now? What happened between there and here?
Yes. So
was it all just roses and puppy dogs, and just everything worked perfectly?
It was not. It's very tough. It's a tough field. It's not for the faint of heart. I was really blessed. I worked for 14 years in my career. I never waited tables. I never worked outside of my field. And primarily a lot of that is because I was able to, had the gifts of being a tailor, had the gifts of being a dyer and distresser. Um, and so I was very blessed. In the very beginning of my career, for most of my career, it really was because I was blessed. God had definitely handed me this career. I was definitely, um, just really grounded in that. Um, as it continued on, I became less and less about being grateful for God and grateful for what I had, and really began to really become a bit of an egomaniac, and to really forget that it was no longer about God. It was all about me, and that I was the center of my world, and really stopped looking beyond the edge of the end of my nose. Um, and so, with that fast-paced world, TV is fast-paced. I'm very glad that the writers got and the actors were able to come to a conclusion last year that was in their favor, because um, both both the unions, all of the unions are completely overworked. There is so much danger that happens with people leaving set late at night and having to come back early, and people driving exhausted. And that go and go and go and go wears on a person, and that thinking that you need to continue to go and go and go. Um, and so I did turn to drugs, and uh, like many in the industry, turned to cocaine and other things to continue to keep going and moving, um, and that mixed with alcohol that I had already started taking really began to take a toll on my life, and I was no longer myself, and I was no longer who I was as a child, or who I even was in the beginning of my career when I even moved to New York. Um, and people began to see that. I Prior to going back home to Boston, where I am now, to be with my family, my best friend Kim, who Tito mentioned, Kim actually called my parents and was like, "Jay is something's up. I'm really concerned about him." And so I did come back, and on September 9th, 2012, the Nativity of Our Lady, beautifully enough, I entered rehab, and that continues to be my clean date. So, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
congratulations.
Thank you,
Yeah,
thank
Yes,
you, thank
we
you.
are. We're
it's an amazing
blessed.
feat. Yeah.
Yeah, we're blessed that we are blessed by the fact that you were able to kind of surrender and kind of come out of that. You and I have talked extensively about this over the years that we've known each other, about the challenge of that and the letting go. I think that's a huge part of it, and I think probably the hardest part.
Yeah,
And I think it's kind of miraculous, your ability to let go in that moment, how quickly you were able to do that.
yeah. There is such strength. I now work a lot, mostly with people who are in recovery and active addiction, and I always talk about, especially with those in active addiction, that that though it might seem completely foolish, that there is so much freedom in admitting that you're powerless, that the drugs, whatever that might be, has control over you, and that the fun stopped a long time ago. Now you're just maintaining, you're no longer yourself, and so that the strength that is in admitting the powerlessness, of the disease of addiction, um, is life giving, truly.
I had a spiritual director once that was very big into the 12 steps. I don't know if he himself benefited them from someone in recovery, but he just found them to be very spiritually powerful. And so he would often use that for me of saying, we are all addicted to sin, and we're all addicted to our egos, and we all have levels that we could benefit from this surrendering to God and giving everything over to him. I'm curious what your faith was like in this period. Was this the time it kind of all came back? Were you struggling with this?
Yeah. No, I absolutely. I think it really was a conversion back to like who I was originally, and who I wanted to be. And I was very blessed. My first sponsor and my sponsorship family were all about service. They were all about and doing the steps and not just sitting back, but really working the program. And so I was not only of service in the meetings, but I was also of service in the local area of Salem, Massachusetts, where I got clean. And a good friend of mine from the program was the manager of a day program for LGBTQ LGBTQ, young adult and young children, really, teenagers who were homeless because they had been kicked out of their homes by their family for being LGBTQ. And so through through volunteering with that program, this really the spirit of service really was reignited, and the flame had gone out a long time ago, and but it was really truly reignited, and just began to really volunteer there, on a weekly basis, a couple days a week, and it was there that I can still remember the first person who myself and this other guy helped get an apartment for, and this kid was just so excited to have a place that was not only his but that was safe, and that he could hang out with his friends at, and didn't have to hang out in places that he shouldn't be hanging out in, and so just to be able to offer this young man safety and a home, a place to sleep that was quiet. I still remember that. I still absolutely remember it, and it still stays with me. And it's definitely what called me not only to the Franciscans, but to really to do the ministry and the work that I am doing now. So,
I think what you're talking about all really touches on that sort of the journey of the 12-step program, which is it's reflective. I mean, it looks inward for sure, but it's not a turning inward for the sake of navel gazing, right? It's meant to help you then look outward, right, and bring you into relationship with others, into a sense of service. It connects you with other people, and I think you and I have talked about this, but what I've heard other people talk about is that if you don't make that turn, if you stay focused on the self, you're really likely to, relapse. It's when you're able to make that turn, and when you're able to be, become more selfless and have that connection with others, and in that sense of service and self-giving, that's when you're really able to kind of maintain sobriety for the long haul.
It is, absolutely. We have many sayings, in the program that I work is Narcotics Anonymous. And so we have a lot of sayings, both the AA and NA, but all the A's, but particularly in NA, we can only keep what we have by giving it away. And that the therapeutic value of one addict helping another is without parallel, and to be able to, that there is the therapeutic value, that there is therapy, there is strength, in not only giving away what was so freely given to us, but also in being able to connect with another addict, another addict in recovery, or another addict, and to be able to really be able to connect with that person and to share honestly and say, I know what you're going through. I felt the same way. I continue to come to meetings, continue to meet with your sponsor and a fellowship family and your fellowship network, and it's possible, to really fully surrender to it, and to work the steps, which again are, to do all of them is to really look outside, and to really focus on the harms that we did, to come to know ourselves, but also to focus on the harms that we did, to repair them, and then to continue to work the steps, focusing on others and focusing in prayer. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's something obviously very Franciscan about it, even with the kind of apocryphal, it's in giving that we receive, the quote unquote St. Francis prayer. But there's something very foundationally Christian about it. What is it? Jesus gives up his life so that we may have life. There's something so contradictory about it that it's like our breath. If you try to hold on to it, you'll never have another one. It's in giving it away that you get it back.
Yeah.
Something obviously for all of us, but I'm wondering for you in that situation, was that something that led you directly to the Franciscans? Was it more of a journey along the way? You'd thought about being a priest before. How did that come back?
So when I was in undergrad, I went to college in the Berkshires. I did have a spiritual director who was a diocesan priest, and he was very lonely. He was at this parish, and he was like, I can't keep doing this. And and he was like, and he said, and we talked about one day, and he's like, let me introduce you to the conventual Franciscans. So they were in Granby, Massachusetts at the time, at St. Hyacinth, this beautiful building. And so I went and met them, and sort of fell in love with the Franciscan charism and the sense of community, the sense of openness and hospitality. And so as I was, I actually still have, it's in the other room, unfortunately. I still have the towel that they gave me, and that was in 1997.
Wow.
So it's on the end of my rosary, which is in my bedroom, but I still have it. It's amazing, really. And so, just that introduction to the Franciscans, and then sort of when I felt called back to this lifestyle, into this life when I, after entering rehab, it really was a life of service. First and foremost, it was really this calling to a life of service, a life of, I started to really enjoy and remember that idea of fraternity that I was introduced to then, with the fellowship that I was experiencing and enjoying, really, and really feeling comfortable in the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous. And so, I think it was definitely that the life of service that called me back, and even there are many people who enter the Franciscans with this ideal of priesthood, and it was really joining the Franciscans and sort of realizing that I really was called to a life of service that I really had to discern during my first 2 years, especially, and of course, obviously, continuing on until the day of my ordination. But if that was in fact what God was calling, if I was being called to priesthood, ultimately I do feel that God was, especially through the sacrament of reconciliation. But first and foremost, it really was service.
I mean, I didn't get to know you until you had entered as a postulant, but I definitely have always seen, that sense of service in you. And so, I think your discernment on that has been spot on. I think about there's a scene from The West Wing that I was thinking about as you were sharing that. I don't know if you've watched The West Wing.
Surprisingly, no.
Oh.
Even though
shame.
Yeah.
even though Christian was in the final season, no,
Okay,
I haven't watched much of it. But
so here's the nutshell version of this story. There's a character, Leo McGarry, who is an alcoholic, right? And he's in recovery. And there's a scene in which he recognizes that somebody on his staff is really struggling psychologically, not with addiction, but there's a trauma that he experienced that is not being dealt with. And so when he he makes it so that he is able to get counseling and get the help that he needs. And afterwards, when the guy asks him, like, how did you know? He tells kind of this story of, there's a guy walking along on the road, and he falls down a hole, and he's calling up, trying to get people to kind of get him out of the hole. And then finally he sees a friend that he knows walk by, and the guy, calls him out, gets his attention. The guy looks down on the hole, sees him, and he jumps into the hole. And he goes, what did you do that for? And now we're both stuck in this hole. And he goes, yeah, but I've been in this hole before, and I know the way out. And, just kind of that sense of service that you're talking about. I kind of feel like that's, in a lot of ways, that's you. You've been in that hole before. You know the way out. And so you're going to jump in with people and guide them out. And I think you really, really started doing that in Chicago when you started getting involved in the prison ministry. And that's kind of where I kind of started to see you were able to, I think, really kind of come alive in the ministry you were doing.
Yeah. Yeah, that was thank you.
Did he just call you out? Were you in the hole?
I was.
That's not what I meant. Not what I meant.
Through the grace of God, I have never been in the hole with handcuffs. I've been in the hole intentionally. But no. Yes, I think during my time in studying at Catholic Theological Union, I got hooked up really early on with Colby House Ministries. Colby House Ministries is the prison and jail and prison ministry for the Archdiocese of Chicago. At the time, Father Mark Bartosik was the director of it. Now Bishop Mark Bartosik, who actually ordained me, and so Bishop Mark was my supervisor, and in the very first year, I did what many volunteers do, which is to go and celebrate, to help go do communion services, and then have time for reflection and conversation with some of the guys afterwards. But in my second and third year, I got to actually be a part of and be connected with Division 6. Division 6 was the drug rehabilitation and offense unit, as well as protective custody. And it was there that I began working with detainees who had, most of whom had been, in addition to drug possession charges or whatever, or drug trafficking charges, were addicted themselves, had substance use disorder themselves. And so to begin to work with them, and many of whom had rich and wonderful faiths, not just Christian, but many different faiths that I worked with. And so to really begin to work with them in understanding, really begin to understanding the 12 steps and 12-step spirituality and what it meant to say that you no longer are in control. And, for a lot of folks in prison, showing your vulnerability and showing and claiming surrender to something is not necessarily something that is easy to do. And so, but when those moments happened, those moments of sitting with someone who, just through complete desperation, said, I can't do this anymore. I understand what you're talking about. I see now that I'm not only addicted to drugs, but I'm addicted to the lifestyle, and how that is triggering as well and gets my blood flowing and my dopamine going and all of that. And so to be able to witness those moments of surrender were just absolute moments where I really began to see the face of God and God at work in the life of others, and in my own life, to be able to see those miracles. These are members of gangs and people who had done some, had really rough childhoods growing up, and their lives were not handed to them, and they worked for everything, and it was there was so much trauma. To see them really surrender to that was very powerful.
So you're now the second person in a row that we've had on the show talking about prison ministry. And I wouldn't say that every Franciscan does it, obviously not, but there's something seemingly very Franciscan, something about our charism, about going to people who are incarcerated, people who are trapped, not only physically, but spiritually. I'm curious what your take on it from our own charism. What's so special about prisons?
I think that, I think certainly a large majority of doing prison ministry, excuse me, is just active listening, and active listening, being merciful, not judging at all. There was never a detainee that I worked with who I ever looked at their chart. Never, not once in 3 years. I never looked at anyone's chart. I didn't care. Of course, they told me. But but
what else are you going to talk about in prison?
Right, exactly. But I never looked. I didn't care. It didn't matter to me. To me, it was the person. It was the person in front of me. And I think that for Saint Francis, it was the leper in front of him. It didn't matter how they got it. It didn't matter what they had done. There was a person in front of him who was in need, and so he, hugged them, took care of him. The brothers did, the sisters did, and so I think that call to really focus on the person, forget any thoughts that we might have about their situation, and just listen, I think is extremely Franciscan.
And would you say that, the work that you did, that you began through that process of recovery and have continued throughout your formation has led you to like where you are now and the degree that you're getting in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, it absolutely has. My vocation was solidified in Division 6 of Cook County Jail in Chicago. It really it really drew home where I felt called, and as well as, in addition to that, my internship year at St. Patrick's St. Anthony in Hartford, Connecticut, working day in and day out with doing outreach and caring for those who are our neighbors. They were our parishioners. There's no question. Our parishioners were the homeless who slept in front of our church, in front of our steps every night. They were our neighbors. We knew them by name. We cared for them. They continued to be cared for by the friars who were still there. And it was during that ministry where that I was doing outreach and working with organizations in Hartford, social service organizations, that I realized that there was something that I didn't know. There was something that these social workers, these caseworkers always knew that I didn't have that puzzle piece to be able to help our clients, our neighbors, people that we worked with. And so I was very blessed that after finishing my MDiv and being ordained, that I was allowed to go on for studies to Boston University School of Social Work, where I'm currently getting my clinical master's. And my focus is behavioral health and trauma. So
what's that going to look like for you? You are ordained a priest. So
Yep.
I think everyone knows more or less what a priest looks like and what a priest does.
Yep.
And now you're going for another career. Does this mean you're not a priest anymore? How does this fit into it all?
Good question. No, it absolutely does. I am still a priest. I think that, so a perfect example, and hand to God, this happened. I still, a friend of mine who's a priest said to me, Jay, if I didn't know it was you, I'd think this was a lie. So my internship this year was at Boston Medical Center in the emergency room, and it was working with the highest utilizers of the ED. It was a wraparound service to care for them in the ED when they're outpatient, inpatient, all sorts of things. And we had this one guy who we knew well, because of his substance use of K2, he often came in undressed, having pulled his clothes off outside, and so
Who hasn't been there? Yeah.
outside of ED. I mean,
Francis was there.
Francis was there, right there, exactly. I did not have a mantle in which to wrap around him, but so I did the second best thing, which was to go get him clothing. So I went down and got him sweatpants and everything, and helped him put it on. And then there was. And then he had to put his socks on because they were really trying to get him to move on. But he when he falls asleep, he's out like a light. And so I was working with the nurse, and the nurse was like, "Look, you have to put your socks on. That's where I draw the line. You have to put your socks on." And I was like, "All right." So she left, and I'm like, "All right, I'm gonna put his socks on." So I went down and I helped him put his socks on. He's dead asleep. He's not even waking up. And I put his shoes on. And as I was putting his shoes on, I went, today's Holy Thursday.
Nice.
I was like,
Nice.
And I was like, you've got jokes. Like, I was like, there are some times where you are just not subtle, God. Mm-hmm. And this was one of them. And getting shivers thinking about it. Yeah. And it was just amazing. And I think that is that use of integration of awareness of the sacramentality of people and the holiness of them, and the going above and beyond, I think, as not just as a social worker, but as a friar, as somebody who's ordained, to really go that further step and to be Christ to others. Later that night, when I was at the Paulus Center for Holy Thursday this year, and I was downstairs in adoration, and sitting there by myself thinking about the day, and I went, and I laughed, and then I started crying. His name is Emmanuel.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, woof.
Wow.
Well, and that is our priesthood. It
Right.
is not simply in a church office. It's not simply in the church celebrating the sacraments. It is priest, but it's also prophet and king. We are called to be Christ-like, which includes service.
Yeah.
Absolutely. 100%. Yep.
It's the part that we sometimes forget about, the discipleship part of, called to imitate Christ in the way he showed us, right? And he says, I'm going to show you now what you have to do. And he washes the apostles' feet. And so that's now, usually taken metaphorically, but God likes to be literal sometimes.
Very. Yeah. And to go that
I'll say I'm so happy to hear that story, because I have a very similar story that ended in the opposite direction. And I think sometimes God does this to kind of like to open our eyes and to shame us a little bit sometimes when we get too focused on the wrong thing. It was also Holy Thursday related. It was my Holy Thursday homily. A few days earlier, I was working at the local soup kitchen homeless day shelter, and I'd done a 2-hour shift, and I worked the shower station there. And a guy came in 5 minutes after we closed, and he said, "Can I take a shower?" And I'm like, I got 17 other appointments. I've got to go. The rules say no. And so I just said no. And he begged me. And I said, if I make the exception for you, I can't make, but I justified it in my brain. I could have stayed 15 other minutes, but I didn't. And I felt feeling bad about it throughout the day, but I was like, hey, I followed the rules. Later that night, I'm in the office all by myself. It's like 9 o'clock at night. Someone knocks at the door. And so my first thought, again, is rules, boundaries. Like I shouldn't answer the door. Turns out it was the same guy. And I didn't answer the door. But afterwards, I realized, like, I am like the biggest fraud of a Christian and a priest. And like it's been this like defining moment for me of like, I'm going to be a little different. And I've got to stretch myself, and I've got to go beyond just the rules and the regulations. And, sometimes you just got to help people, because that's my priesthood, along with all the other things I do.
Yeah. The boundaries are so important. They really are.
Yeah.
They really are. And so, but it's the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law. And I think that's where the call to be Christian, the call to have answered the call to not only to be a friar and a priest, but to to go that extra mile Um, and to be able to have that conversation and to be able to say, I think, look, I'm doing it for you this time, but let's talk about this next time because we can't keep doing this, and I don't want this to get something bigger. Um, uh, but no, it's very hard. It's so very hard to be able to create those boundaries and to be able to say, I so often we hear so many confessions here. I was hearing confessions earlier this morning, and to be able to say to someone who is struggling, I pass these people all the time. I never give money. I don't know if I should give money. And that's very often their struggle. And I say, well, don't give them money, but just smile at them. Get to know their name. I said, I can tell you the name of the person on the corner. Go over and say, Father Jay says your name is Tony. That's not his name. That's a made-up name. And so I just wanted to introduce myself. And so, those things are ways that we can be personable. We can recognize the other person. That's all they want. Human recognition.
Yeah, and remembering we don't live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. I think we need those spiritual fruits as well, and we need that relationship. We need that comfort to know that we're seen and loved.
Yep. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So, my brother, you're close to finishing up with your MSW here. What does the future hold for you?
Well,
no more school.
No more school. Ever. This is definitely it for as far as schooling. So I go on for, I will graduate in a year from now, in next May, and I will have an MSW. I then have to get the study and take the license to be an LSW, and then receive my hours to become an LICSW, licensed clinical social worker. So, and then so to be able to find a location and to be able to find a place where I'm able to be able to begin to receive those clinical hours, and to be able to begin helping people, whatever that might look like in the future. And it's pretty exciting. I'm looking forward to it.
I think it's so important, not that everyone should get an MSW. We already get an MDiv, which is a 4-year program, plus the philosophy and all that. But it is something, as I graduated from it, I felt so deficient in realizing, like, I can't solve people's problems. And not that you can necessarily solve them either. But, we are a jack of all trades, but a master of none as priests. We should know a little bit about everything, but nothing are we experts on. And so I do think that what you do here is, you've got a little more skills, you've got a little more tools in the toolbox that you can help people. And I think that's fantastic that even if, not to degrade it, but like you work as a parish priest and you're not explicitly using the MSW, you're going to be so much more effective in handling the world around you.
Sure, absolutely. It's a professional degree, and so for the earliest, some of the earliest social workers in the country were nuns. And so,
isn't that often the case? The nuns really forged the way.
Absolutely. And so for years, religious and have been doing amazing work. But in this field, but this idea of having the degree of social work not only professionalizes it, but it's understanding more of the nuance of everything that goes into the trauma and the psychology and the struggles that people have day in and day out, and to be able to really help them, like you said, Casey, whether it be with substance use, mental illness, medications, health insurance, all of these things. So,
Well, we thank you so much for what you do, and we just see this thread throughout. I mean, from the working collaboratively with a theater, to working in prisons, to working with LGBT people who are at risk, to working with homeless people. I mean, there's seeming this spirit within you that wants to work together and to love and to care for those who are lost and forgotten. And that's just something we love to see and promote. It's not something that I think has the highest value in our society, and you're probably going to come in and out of a lot of people's lives probably without remembering you so much. But the collective nature of it all, it's just such a beautiful image of what it means to be a Franciscan, and we thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you both for what you're doing here, and to be able to to be a physical presence on the internet and to be able to share not only my story, but all the stories of the friars and your own, and to really talk about all the good that's going on in our church and in the order. So
I also want to personally thank you, Jay, because, through knowing you and being in, fraternal relationship with you, I've grown so much, and I've been able to learn just so much about, struggles that other people have had, but also the similarity in some of my own struggles. You were open and invited me to open NA meetings. And I experienced profound instances of growth, recognizing that some of the things that I struggle with, other people struggle with too. Actually, everything that I struggle with, other people struggle with too. It's one thing to know that here, but when you go to a meeting, you get to experience it here. And you get to meet people who have shed so much ego that it invites you kind of to do the same. So I know that I've grown just from being in relationship with you, and I thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Tito. I appreciate that.
Jay, good luck with your final tests and papers, and just one more semester left. One more year. You're
more
almost
year.
there.
One more
year.
Yep.
Well, God bless. You're going to do great.
Thank you. God bless.
So, Tito, obviously, the crux of his story is the caring for the poor. It's going for the extraordinary things that he's doing with his MSW. But I have to admit that I kind of wanted the whole hour interview to just be the Broadway things, because I have so many more questions, and I wanted the tea to be spilled. But, I knew that wasn't the point of what we were doing.
Maybe we could do like a summer special. We've done some stuff like that in the past, where we just invite him back and be
Jay
like,
Wood's tell all.
Yeah, that's right. Be like, let's just tell stories. Let's hear some funny stories, some embarrassing stories, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. But what a unique story, his own. I think someone who wanted to be a priest and through the grace of God got to live their dream, and then left God in some ways and became all about themselves, and that conversion that we can continue to have even when we find what we want, and then realize that we want some other things. I mean, I think there's something so relatable, as unrelatable as Broadway is for most people. That story is something of trial, of falling, of being lifted up, of finding grace. It's the Christian story right there.
Yeah, and the humility to not only recognize your own deficiencies, but then to also share that in a way that invites other people to change and grow as well. Such an integral part of that journey for anyone struggling with addiction, and always just a wonderful example to me as a friar of that reminder to littleness, right? That reminder to be minor is a reminder to be humble in that regard.
Absolutely. And Lord knows you need it. So thank God for Jay as a witness. Don't we all?
That's right.
Well, Tito, it's been wonderful. We've got another artist coming up next week. Can't wait to talk to our good brother who uses a different medium, but no less important. Also gone on for different levels of school. It's going to be great. I don't even know if Liz is watching anymore, but
oh no, she's watching.
Say bye. Is she watching?
Yeah.
Well, I demand a comment. Unless she comments on this video, we're not saying goodbye to her anymore.
Okay, but this is the last one then. Potentially, right?
Sure.
All right.
Sure.
Ready? Bye, Liz.
Bye, Liz.